Sure, no problem. Okay, so for the coin toss, Jonathan, do you want to go ahead and call it?
I'll pick tails, please.
All right. Flip a coin. It is tails.
I would like to be on the con side of the resolution.
All right. And then Jayel, you get to choose your speaking position.
I'll speak second, please.
All right. Alrighty, so I am ready to go when everybody else is.
Well, are all my judges ready? Is my opponent ready? I will be beginning my 4 minutes starting right now. Hello everyone, my name is Jonathanmundell, and today I will be debating on the con side of the resolution, quote, the United States has a responsibility to welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. I'd like to get a few quick definitions out of the way to understand the resolution better. You can define oppression as unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Responsibility can be defined as a duty or task that you are required or expected to do. Welcoming them is talking about welcoming them into the country, and resettle is talking about help resettle them into another country. With that out of the way, I believe that this debate should be decided by a cost-benefit analysis framework. This means the winner of this debate should be decided by which team brings a better balance of costs to benefits. Later on in this debate, I will be taking the costs that I have shown and comparing them to my opponent's benefits. For my first contention, I will be talking about why the United States does not have a responsibility, and my second and third contentions will be about showing the cost of welcoming and resettling. So my first contention or argument, why the US does not have a responsibility. Saying that the US has a responsibility to help those who flee oppression is unfair. Imagine you have a friend who comes over and says he needs food because his parents are not letting him eat. Is it your responsibility to help him? I agree that it is morally correct to help them, but that does not mean it is your responsibility to do that. So it is unfair to say the same for the US. My second contention or argument is problems with welcoming them. My subpoint A of that is not feeling at home. One of the problems with bringing people from other places is that they will be at a complete cultural shock, which could hurt them. Imagine a refugee coming from Thailand and they are Buddhist. If they came to the US, a country that is only 1.2% Buddhist, they would struggle to find a place to worship or friends to celebrate their religion with. They would even struggle to find food in the US of their culture. My subpoint B is facing discrimination. Many people coming from other countries could face discrimination and hate when coming to the US. This would make their lives tough and even dangerous. Imagine you're coming from the country of Kenya, a country that is mainly black. According to a 2018 Harvard study, 42% of Americans in the US who are black say that they have experienced violence because of their race. Is it really worth taking these people and putting them into a dangerous environment? My third contention is talking about the costs of getting other countries to accept resettlement. I'd also like to talk about the resettlement aspect, meaning resettling them in another country. A problem with that is that we have to get other countries to be willing to take people in the first place. It is pretty easy to just say we can hand other countries these people who are fleeing oppression and leave, but it is unrealistic. How is the pro team going to prove that other countries will be willing to allow these people into their countries? I'd like to do a quick recap of my case. My first contention was talking about why the US does not have a responsibility. My second contention was the problems with welcoming them. A subpoint A in that was not feeling at home, and a subpoint B in that was the facing of discrimination. My third contention was the costs of getting other countries to accept resettlement. Looking at this from a cost-benefit analysis look, I've shown you the costs, and I urge you to cast your ballot for the con side, my side. Thank you, judges. Thank you, opponent. I will be yielding the rest of my time.
Judges ready? Opponent ready? I'll be getting my time now. Hello, my name is Jayel, and I will be debating on the pro side of the resolution. The U.S. has a responsibility to welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. My framework, which is the set of standards you can use to evaluate the case, is two-world analysis. This asks you to judge the debate based on which debater can demonstrate the other side of the argument will result in a better world. Before I begin, I would like to define the resolution. I'll define those who flee oppression as refugees, responsibility as a given duty to follow through with, and welcome to take in and resettle the people fleeing oppression. Now I'll submit contentions or arguments. Contention 1, being an example. Subpoint A, encouragement for other countries. Currently, it should be our responsibility to help others. According to the UNHCR, it's an international law. But as an added bonus for doing so, we can encourage other countries to step in. The US is a large country with a great economy, so it only makes sense for us to help first. But perhaps other countries will observe and decide to also prioritize resettling refugees, lifting the burden off of our country alone. Subpoint B, better reputation. According to the Pew Research Center, the image of the US is plummeting. For example, in one of their surveys, data showed that 41% of the UK has a favorable opinion of the US. In France, only 31% of the population sees the country positively, and in Germany, only 26% rate the US favorably. According to the article, Korea was the only country that had the majority, being 59%, who viewed the US positively. Of course, the stats are not going to swing 100%, but if we make it our duty to resettle those in need, other countries will look at what we're doing and appreciate our efforts. Contention 2, hospitality. Subpoint A, an increasing number of refugees. According to the UN Refugee Agency, at the end of 2020, there are 26.4 million refugees, the highest the world has ever seen. Considering these numbers, hosting refugees is not something we should do just because. It's our responsibility, and citizens should be proud that the country is stepping in to help families in need. Additionally, we shouldn't only host refugees. This isn't enough, it can be cruel sometimes. According to the UNHCR, some refugees stay in camps for 17 years. The government should put more funding into getting an actual place for people to stay. Subpoint B, declining hosting rate. According to the American Immigration Council and the Migration Policy Institute, in 2020, the U.S. resettled fewer than 12,000 refugees, the smallest amount since the resettlement program began. Now compare this to the 207,000 refugees settled in 1980. The U.S. has $18.62 trillion in gross domestic product, the highest amount in the world. And with the recent pandemic ending and beginning to slow down, there is no excuse to be turning down or refusing to resettle people that seek a better life if we can afford it. Contention 3, diversity. Subpoint A, more knowledge and skill sets. Accepting refugees is not only good for them and their safety, but also good for the country. Refugees from different countries can share knowledge and bring new customs and ideas to America. This is important because it can result in a better economy in the long run. A country with different knowledge and ways of thinking will succeed as opposed to an ordinary one. Subpoint B, cultural diversity. The U.S. generally lacks information about other cultures, languages, and way of life. Additionally, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, only 20% of Americans can converse in 2 or more languages, compared to the 56% of Europeans. If we allow refugees from other countries who might speak different languages and have different traditions, perhaps more Americans will make an attempt to become familiar with other cultures. And language is not the only thing. Different food and traditions can also be brought. To recap, it is America's responsibility to welcome and resettle refugees because we should be an example to other countries, be a hospitable country ourselves, and increase diversity in the U.S. Thank you for listening.
Alrighty, we've got 1 minute of prep time starting now. Alrighty, it's time for cross-examination.
Judges ready? Opponent ready? I'll be beginning my 2 minutes now. So, do you agree that when we define those who flee oppression, it could mean anyone fleeing oppression and not necessarily refugees?
I do agree, yes. But I say refugees because of course, those who flee oppression is a broad term, but refugees, the definition is somebody who's fleeing their country because of war, like persecution or natural disasters. And I think that definition fits people who flee oppression as well.
Thank you. So, if you agree that, refugees fleeing their country is a type of person who are oppressed, my definition that I brought into oppression was unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power. So what about a kid who's being forced to do his homework by his parents? You could say that's oppressive behavior. Is the United States of America going to help them?
No, because it's not the same type of oppressive behavior from that refugees are experiencing, or in your words, people who flee oppression.
Thank you. What about, if there was an alien race that said they were trying to flee oppression, would the United States of America help them?
Well, firstly, it depends on what type of alien race, and I don't see how this is relevant to the resolution. And I can't speak for the U.S. if they would, of course, accept them or not.
Thank you. In your first contention, so point B, you talk about how the U.S. has a bad reputation. Do you have evidence that other countries seeing us taking in people who are fleeing oppression would make them like the U.S. more?
I don't have any specific evidence, but I think that it's a very reasonable thing to assume that it would, of course, because we are helping people and resettling them, and of course, the people in the countries that refugees are fleeing from, they will greatly appreciate, I would assume. And so I think it's a reasonable assumption.
Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Judges ready? Opponent ready? Beginning my time now. Do you agree that having more people with different skill sets and knowledge is beneficial for our country?
I think so. I think that saying that someone who's fleeing oppression would bring in a bunch of new skill sets already from that term is kind of unrealistic. I think that people who are from a country who they're fleeing oppression doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have a completely new culture or new ideas that have never been seen by the United States before.
Mm-hmm. So you do agree that, but it's not, a drastic difference.
I agree that people from other countries or that new skill sets would be beneficial to the U.S.
Thank
I
you.
think saying
Wouldn't you agree that it is the United States' responsibility, considering it's an international law, to take in refugees?
well, I'm not familiar with any international law taking in refugees. I think that if we're debating this, that means, if a country has an international law to take in refugees, why haven't all these countries been punished for it? I think that if there is a law, this wouldn't even be a question.
Well, I mean, it's not really a law that's enforced that much, and international laws aren't really taken that seriously in general. It's more, national and government laws. But so, would you agree though, to answer the question?
Well, again, I'm not familiar with any international laws. You'd have to send me information about that. But I agree that if it's
Okay.
not a law that anyone gets in trouble for, then I don't know how big of a deal it is.
And do you agree that having more people from different countries can help America better understand different cultures?
I think that it would be nice to say that, but the fact of the matter is, a lot of people from other cultures and other countries can face a lot of hate, as I've shown in my second contention. People aren't always going to be wide open and willing to see that there are people from other countries coming over.
Okay, thank you.
Alrighty, we've got 2 minutes of prep time starting now. All right, prep time is over. It's time for rebuttals.
Thank you. Are my judges ready? Is my opponent ready? I'll be beginning my 4 minutes now. Hello everyone, once again my name is Jonathanmundell and I'll be debating on the con side of the resolution. Quote, the United States has a responsibility to welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. I'll be doing my rebuttal segment for this debate. I'll go over a few things with our framework or the lens we believe we should look at this debate through. I'll then give a few more comments about cross-examination and how this debate's going. I'll then give a response to my opponent's case, recap my case, and talk a little bit more about framework. Now, the framework or weighing mechanism my opponent brought in is the two worlds analysis. I believe that as a judge, it's easier to look at it through one, so I'm fine using the two worlds analysis as well. In reality, you can say that a better world is simply a world with a better balance of costs to benefits. So I'm fine using a two worlds analysis as our framework. Before we get into this debate, I would like to quickly clarify a few things that I believe the PRO team has to uphold. My opponent, the PRO team, is affirming the resolution that the United States has a responsibility to welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. That means they have to prove three things. A, that we have a responsibility to do it. B, that we have a responsibility to welcome them. And C, that we have a responsibility to resettle them. Throughout this debate, I'd like you to keep in mind that those are the three criteria the PRO team has to uphold to win this debate. For a recap of my opponent's case, the first contention was saying how we could provide an example to the people or to other countries with a subpoint A. I think that this is unrealistic because my opponent has brought in it happening previous times. You could say the United States of America is a democracy and democracies are great. So why isn't every country in the world doing it? Why aren't they a democracy? I think that's a question of saying because the United States of America does it, it will encourage other countries to do it. I think that's an unrealistic expectation. My opponent's first contention, subpoint B, they said it would give a better reputation to the U.S. Once again, I think that they didn't prove that this would make other countries think better of us. We go to the democracy example. Some countries like us less because we are a democracy or things. So it's not necessarily going to increase other countries' opinions on the U.S. My opponent's second contention, their subpoint A and subpoint B, are all about the problems that refugees are facing and why we should help them. On the con side, I agree. I agree that that it would be morally correct to help them. Once again, though, we are debating whether or not the United States has a responsibility to help them. We're not debating whether or not we should. We're talking about whether or not it is the United States' responsibility to do that. So I believe that just talking about that we should do them isn't relevant to the topic of this debate. My opponent's third contention talks about how there will be a lot of diversity. Their subpoint A and subpoint B are all about how bringing in new people will be better for the country. Now, once again, this sounds nice, but we've seen it throughout history. I've shown it in my second contention. These people are going to face hate. They're going to face hate and discrimination no matter what, and it's not necessarily going to make people want to learn more about other ideas. They're just going to not like them as much. I'd like to quickly recap my case. My first contention or first argument was why the U.S. does not have a responsibility. My second contention was the problems with welcoming them, with a subpoint A and talking about not feeling at home, and a subpoint B and talking about facing discrimination. My third contention was costs of getting other countries to accept resettlement. You can look at this through a two worlds analysis, but I believe you should keep in mind the three things the PRO team has to prove. With that all, thank you judges, thank you opponent. I will be yielding the rest of my time.
Judges ready? Opponent ready? My time is beginning now. I'll now state the rebuttal section of this debate. As a reminder, our framework or weighing mechanism is two-worlds analysis, meaning that the judge should award the team that presents a world that can function best while adopting the system we are debating. In this speech, I will recap my contentions, recap cross-examination, and address some things that happened there, and rebut my opponent's points. To recap my contentions, it is America's responsibility to welcome and resettle refugees, because we should be an example to other countries, be a hospitable country ourselves, and increase diversity in the U.S. In the cross-examination, my opponent agreed that having people with different skill sets and knowledge is beneficial for the US, and this is a direct result of hosting more refugees, as I proved in my constructive speech. My opponent also agreed that it is our responsibility, considering there is a national law. Now allow me to rebut my opponent's contentions from their constructive speech. Their first contention was why the US does not have a responsibility. Their subpoint A was that it's unfair, even though it's morally correct. I think it is fair. The US is a leading country with a strong economy. Refugees don't really have many other countries to flee to that can provide them with a sustainable life. Additionally, it's an international law. Even though the law is not enforced much, it is still our responsibility to follow and respect it. Subpoint B, they don't have a subpoint B. Contention 2, problems with welcoming them. The subpoint A was that they may not feel at home. I doubt that refugees would feel, homesick. They are fleeing oppression at the end of the day, and they're free to bring family, friends, and anybody else with them. And eventually they would adapt to the US, so it would be a very temporary thing. Subpoint B, his subpoint B was facing discrimination. And I think this actually supports the pro. The resolution is that the US should welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. And yes, at the moment they might face discrimination. And I'm arguing that they should not. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they don't. His contention 3 was the cost of getting other countries. And their subpoint A was that countries have to be willing to let us come. And most people who flee oppression do not get government permission. There might be a dictatorship or something similar to that, so it may not always be possible for the refugee to do so. So, with all that said, that concludes my rebuttal speech. Thank you, judges, for listening, and thank you, opponent.
All right, we've got 2 more minutes of prep time starting now. All righty, it's time for summaries.
Judges ready? Opponent ready? I will be beginning my 3 minutes now. Hello everyone, my name is Jonathanmundell, and I'll be giving you my final summary speech for this debate. We'll start off with a brief talk about framework, then weigh some impacts or the biggest things about this debate, and then I will recap my case and give a few list of voters or reasons why I believe my team, the con team, has won this debate. Once again, we're going off the 2 worlds analysis, meaning looking at this based on which world would be a better world. I'd like to quickly respond to my opponent's rebuttal of my 3rd contention. I talked about the costs of resettlement. My opponent was talking about, these people aren't given permission by the government. I'd like to quickly re-clarify my 3rd contention is talking about the resettlement part of this resolution. resolution is the United States has a responsibility to welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. The resettlement is talking about help them to another country. Here, my third contention is talking about how that would be difficult because we couldn't get other countries to agree to do that. I'd just like to clarify that that's what my third contention is for my opponent. For a few impacts are the biggest parts of this debate. I believe the most important part of this debate is the proof of the resolution. Once again, the pro team, my opponent's team, is trying to prove that A, we have a responsibility to do this, B, we have a responsibility to welcome them, and C, that we have a responsibility to resettle them. And that's where my first voter comes in. My opponent has not talked about the resettlement aspect. They're talking about the benefits of bringing them to the United States of America, but they haven't talked at all about the benefits of resettling them, whereas I've shown you my world or the costs of the resettlement and how it will be difficult. If my opponent cannot prove that resettlement would be another option as well, as they cannot prove all the problems that the resolution brings up. My opponent also, I believe, has not talked enough about the responsibility aspect. My opponent says it is the United States' responsibility because it would benefit us, but there's a difference. Responsibility, as I've defined it, as a duty or task that you're required or expected to do. Or the United States having a responsibility, as I've given an example, my first contention would be like a friend asking you to help them. You may say it's morally correct to do it, but the question is whether or not it is your responsibility to do that. Once again, I believe that is the most important part, is talking about whether or not it is the responsibility of the United States of America to welcome and resettle those who flee oppression. I believe my opponent has not talked about that enough. But with that, I'll be finishing off my summary. Thank you, judges. Thank you, opponent. I yield the rest of my time.
Judges ready? Opponent ready? All right, my time has started right now. Once again, as a final reminder, our framework or weighing mechanism is two-world analysis, meaning that the judge should award the win to the team that presents a world that can function best while adapting the system we are debating. In this speech, I will recap my contentions, weigh my impacts versus my opponents, and state the reasons why the pro should win this debate. To recap, it's America's responsibility to welcome and resettle refugees because we should be an example to other countries, be a hospitable country ourselves, and increase diversity in the U.S. My opponent mentioned how referring to people who... Let me weigh my impacts against my opponents. My opponent has brought in no clear impact in terms of the U.S. having responsibility, them not feeling welcome, and the cost of resettling the refugees. They haven't shown that it will affect more people than mine, or even given any proof that it will work and if it's reversible or not. My impacts are widespread and are likely to happen if the resolution is adopted. I will now say the reasons pro should win this debate. Reason 1. The pro provided evidence when it was required. Some specific examples are in subpoints 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and 3B. Reason 2. Their contention 1 and 3 only have one subpoint. Reason 3. In the cross-examination, my opponent agreed that having people with different skill sets and knowledge is beneficial for the U.S., and this is a direct result of hosting more refugees. My opponent also agreed that it's our responsibility, considering that this is an international law. Reason 4. I weighed my impacts against my opponents. And reason 5, the pro did prove that it's America's responsibility. I mentioned in my constructive that it's our responsibility to be an example and maintain our reputation, the responsibility to maintain a diverse population in the U.S., and that it's our responsibility to be hospitable and welcome those who come to our country. Finally, my last reason, pro best met the judging criteria. At the beginning of this debate and throughout all the other speeches, I mentioned that my framework was two-world analysis, meaning that the judge should award the win to the team that presents a country that can function best while adapting the system we're debating. As I'm on the pro, I've been debating that it's America's responsibility to welcome and resettle refugees. I've tried to emphasize that a world where this is true can function well and flourish. So for all these reasons, you can confidently cast your ballot for the pro. Thank you.